The story of Major William Glynn Wakeman Durham is inseparable from the turbulent history of the northwest frontier during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. His life and death illustrate the challenges faced by British Indian Army officers who served along one of the most difficult and volatile frontiers of the British Empire. Major William Glynn Wakeman Durham was born in 1884 in Barnstaple, Devon, England. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Royal Artillery on December 24, 1902. Like many ambitious young officers seeking active service, he transferred to the Indian Army on July 28, 1905 as a lieutenant, joining the 27th Light Cavalry. Over the following years, he steadily advanced in rank, becoming captain on December 24, 1911, and Major on December 24, 1917. To understand the circumstances that led to his death, it is necessary to look back several decades. In 1848, following the Second Sikh War, the British East India Company occupied Dera Ismail Khan. This brought the British into direct contact with the fiercely independent tribes inhabiting the mountains west of the Indus, particularly the Masuds and Wazirs of Waziristan and the Shiranis to the south. Unlike the settled agricultural communities of the Indus Plains, these tribes lived in rugged mountain country where central authority had always been weak. They fiercely defended their independence and resisted every outside power that attempted to extend its authority over them. Throughout the second half of the 19th century, the frontier witnessed frequent tribal raids, punitive expeditions, and military campaigns. British officers stationed at Dera Ismail Khan, Tank, Banu, and other frontier posts became familiar with the harsh realities of mountain warfare. Columns frequently marched into the hills, only to discover that conventional military tactics often proved ineffective against tribesmen who possessed an intimate knowledge of the terrain. Numerous expeditions were launched against tribes that attacked British territory or refused to acknowledge British authority. Gradually, the British developed what became known as the frontier policy, combining military force with political negotiations, tribal subsidies, economic allowances, and the establishment of frontier militias. Even so, peace remained fragile, and the region earned a reputation as one of the most challenging frontiers anywhere in the British Empire. When the First World War broke out in 1914, the 27th Light Cavalry was stationed at Neemuch in present-day Madhya Pradesh. Unlike many Indian Army regiments that served overseas in France, East Africa, Mesopotamia, Gallipoli or Palestine, the regiment remained in India throughout the war. Nevertheless, its officers and men were far from inactive. The northwest frontier required constant vigilance, and scarcely had the guns fallen silent in Europe before another crisis emerged on India's western frontier. In May 1919, Afghanistan invaded British India, beginning the Third Anglo-Afghan War. Although the conflict lasted only a few months, it reignited unrest throughout the tribal belt. Encouraged by the Afghan invasion and sensing that Britain had been weakened after 4 exhausting years of global war, many tribal lashkars resumed their resistance. The frontier once again became a theatre of military operations, where regular troops, frontier militias, and tribal fighters confronted one another across the valleys and mountain passes of Waziristan. Major Durham and the 27th Light Cavalry participated in these operations. By September 1919, British authorities had received intelligence that a force of around 200 armed men, consisting of Masuds, Zalik-el-Wazirs, Shiranis, and deserters from the southern Waziristan militia, had assembled near the Sheikh Haidar Pass in the Zarqani area. Zarqani featured prominently in the writings of all the British explorers and scholar administrators who came to Dera Ismail Khan and Dera Ghazi Khan, including Mount Stuart Elphinstone, T.G. Vignay, Charles Masson, Herbert Benjamin Edwards and Edward E. Oliver. Situated along the historic Multan to Kandahar trade route, Zarqani held strategic importance throughout history. Today, a deliberately built Frontier Corps (FC) fort, constructed by the British, still stands there. On September 19, 1919, Major Durham led a reconnaissance force consisting of a squadron of the 27th Light Cavalry, a Stokes mortar section, 10 sowers, and 20 rifles from the Southern Waziristan militia to investigate these reports. As the column advanced through broken ground thick with tamarisk scrub, it entered an area that offered excellent concealment to the enemy. The tribesmen had selected their position carefully, and the reconnaissance party suddenly came under heavy fire from concealed positions. The engagement quickly became desperate. Major Durham was killed while directing his men under intense fire. 1 Indian officer and 4 Indian soldiers also lost their lives, while 5 others were wounded. The force suffered further losses, including 9 rifles and a Hotchkiss machine gun, and several members of the militia were captured. Reinforcements later attempted to recover the position, but were compelled to withdraw because the enemy occupied commanding heights and considerably outnumbered the British detachment. Major Durham was only 35 years old. His grave, recorded as grave number 13, in Draban, Dera Ismail Khan, remains a silent reminder of the long and often forgotten history of the frontier, where British officers, Indian soldiers, and tribal warriors struggled for generations in a conflict shaped as much by geography, tribal independence, and local custom as by imperial ambition. The grave marks not only the resting place of a British officer, but also a chapter in the larger history of the frontier that connected Dera Ismail Khan with the mountains of Waziristan. Today, Major Durham's story survives not only in military records, but also in local memory. His initials, WWGW, became associated with a grave in the Assistant Commissioner's compound at Draban. Time gradually erased his name from popular memory, but the grave itself endured. Whether remembered through official military records or local tradition, his life represents one small yet significant chapter in the complex history of the Dera Ismail Khan frontier, where the British Empire encountered the fiercely independent tribes of Waziristan and the Sharani country. I have visited this grave many times. On one occasion, I visited it with my English friend Ivan Mannheim. Standing before the weathered gravestone, we reflected on the extraordinary journey of the man buried beneath it. Born in the peaceful countryside of Devon in southwest England, Major Durham spent his military career thousands of miles from home, serving on one of the most dangerous frontiers of the British Empire. His life ended not on the battlefields of Europe during the First World War, but among the rugged hills of Waziristan, where imperial ambition collided with fiercely independent tribal societies. It is one of history's many ironies that while millions remember the great battles of the Western Front, very few know the names of those who died in the smaller, largely forgotten conflicts that continued on the distant frontiers of the empire. Major Durham was one of those men. His death was scarcely noticed outside military circles, yet it formed part of a frontier struggle that had already lasted for generations and would continue for many years afterward. Today, the mountains where Major Durham fought remain largely unchanged. The same rocky ridges, dry stream beds, tamarisk thickets, and narrow passes still dominate the landscape. The villages still cling to the hillsides, and many of the ancient routes followed by traders, shepherds, and armies remain visible. What has changed is the empire that once sought to control them. The British Empire has disappeared. The Indian army of the Raj no longer exists, and the frontier itself has become part of modern Pakistan. Yet one solitary grave in Draban continues to remind us of a forgotten chapter of history. It is a reminder that history is not preserved only in archives and official documents. Sometimes it survives in an old gravestone, a fading inscription, or the memory of local people who continue to ask a simple question: who was the man buried here? The answer leads us back to Major William Glynn Wakeman Durham, a cavalry officer whose fate became forever intertwined with the history of Waziristan and the frontier of Dera Ismail Khan. His story is not merely the biography of one soldier, it is a window into a frontier that shaped the destinies of empires, tribes, and generations of people who lived between the plains of the Indus and the mountains of Waziristan.